Hello class and welcome to section 10.6, which is about the distance and midpoint formulas. By the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to find the distance between 2 points, use the distance formula to find a missing coordinate, and find the midpoint between 2 points. The distance formula is an equation to find the distance between any two given points. The formula says distance is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. This formula is based on the fact that you can draw a right triangle between any two diagonals. This bottom part is the difference between x2 and x1. The up and down part is the difference between y2 and y1. So those are the sides of our triangle. We square those to follow the Pythagorean theorem. And then we take the square root because in order to find the distance, it would be d squared. But we want just the distance, so we're going to take the square root to get rid of that squared. So that's a little bit about where the distance formula comes from. In order to use it, so finding the distance between these 2 points, we are going to label our points first and say x1, y1, x2, and y2. So we've got the distance is equal to the square root of x2, which is -5, minus x1, which is -7 squared, plus y2 minus y1 squared. We can go through and simplify this then. Subtracting a negative becomes a positive in both of those cases. So I've got my distance is equal to -5 plus 7 gives me 2 squared, plus -8 plus 2 gives me -6 squared. I can keep simplifying this and say that distance is equal to square root of 4 plus 36, which is the same thing as saying the square root of 40. Now we know there isn't actually a square root of 40, so we're going to use our knowledge of simplifying radicals to go through and simplify this. So square root of 40 can be split into square root of 4 and square root of 10, giving me a final answer of 2 square roots of 10. So we're going to simplify those radical expressions instead of finding the decimal for this lesson. Go ahead and try this one on your own. Plugging in the information that we know, simplifying that down, we end up with distance is equal to the square root of 41. That can't be simplified, so that is our final answer. The next thing we are going to look at is using the distance formula to find a missing value in an ordered pair. So if we're looking at this problem, we've got 2, a. We're going to use the distance formula to help us find that value. So we already know our distance is 10 units, so I'm going to plug in 10 for d. So I've got 10 is equal to the square root of x2, which is -6, minus x1, which is 2, square that value, plus y2, which is 2, minus a, which is y1, squared. So we're taking and we are just plugging in our given information. Next, we're going to simplify what we can on the square root side. So I've got 10 still is equal to the square root of -6 minus 2 gives me -8 squared, plus, and then I can't simplify this second part. So I'm just going to leave that as 2 minus a squared. I'm going to keep simplifying because I know that -8 squared is 64. So I've got the square root of 64, the square root of 64 plus, and then 2 minus a in parentheses. Now we want to start getting things away from that a value. So I'm going to go ahead and square both sides to get rid of that square root. So I've got 100 is equal to 64 plus 2 minus a squared. Again, I want to move things away from the a, so I'm going to subtract 64 from both sides. giving me 36 is equal to 2 minus a squared. Now I want to get rid of that squared, so I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. The square root of 36 is 6, so I'm going to get 6 is equal to 2 minus a. But we also know that there's a negative case for square roots, so I've got negative 6 is equal to 2 minus a as well. Our next job is to keep solving for a, so I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, giving me 4 is equal to negative a. Dividing by negative 1, I get a first answer of a is equal to negative 4. Then I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. Subtract 2 from both sides, giving me negative 8 is equal to negative a. Dividing by negative 1 on both sides, I find out that 8 is equal to a. So there are always going to be two possible values that are going to give you this distance. In this case, we have negative 4 and positive 8. Go ahead and try this one on your own. So we set it up, distance is 5, plugged the information that we had into the square roots, simplified, got rid of the square root by squaring, continued to simplify, got rid of the squared by taking the square root, and then solved both the positive and negative case to get answers of 7 and 1. Next thing we need to talk about is the midpoint. The midpoint is the point on a line that is the same distance between the two endpoints. As the name suggests, it is right in the middle of 2 points. The midpoint formula is very straightforward. You take both of your x values, add them together, divide by 2. That's going to give you your x coordinate. Same thing happens with the y. Take your first y and your second y, add them together, divide by 2, and that's going to give you your answer for your y coordinate. So for example, the midpoint between negative 1, 2 and 3, negative 4. The first thing I need to do is take my x coordinates and add them. So I've got negative 1 plus 3, and I'm going to divide that by 2. Negative 1 plus 3 gives me 2 over 2, which gives me a final answer of 1. So my x coordinate is going to be 1. I'm then going to go ahead and plug in my y coordinate. So I've got negative 2 plus negative 4 over 2. Negative 2 plus negative 4 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So that means my midpoint between those two values is 1, negative 3. So that's the value directly in the middle of those two. Go ahead and try this one on your own. For the x, you get 4.5. For the y, you get 6. So it's 4.5, 6. If you have questions about this or anything else from the lesson, please let me know when you get to class.